Hi, good afternoon. My name is Adina and we welcome you back to the Tech23 Impact Circles. And for those new to the circles, welcome. Now, thank you all for joining today's conversation, which is on the role of government, customer, investor, market maker. As is custom, I would first like to acknowledge both the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation and the Bunwurrung and Woiwurrung Wurundjeri peoples of the Kulin Nation, the traditional custodians of the land where the Slattery's team meets, works, and creates. We pay our respects to the elders, both past and present. Always was, always will be Aboriginal land. Now, today's conversation is going to be kindly led by Phil Morle, and he's joined by Dr. Kate Cornick, Colin Denver, Dr. Marcus Doherty, Dr. Julia Playford, Gabrielle Upton MP, and Sue Wiblin. I'd like to make a special shout out before we kick off to the Tech23 sponsors, Transport for New South Wales, Main Sequence Cyro Innovation Fund, Addison's, my apologies, Oz Industry Entrepreneurs Program delivered in partnership with I4 Connect, Addison's, ASX, Ansto, Curtin University, Cicada Innovations, and Evoke AG for making Tech23 happen. We thank you. Good to see you here, Rachel.
Hi, Adina, and hello, everyone. I'd like to take this opportunity to welcome everyone, especially our contributors who are helping to make these Tech23 Impact Circles happen. I want to thank all of those Zooming in for being part of the Tech23 Circles. Please say hello to each other in the chat, and you can share your knowledge and also ask your questions in there as well. We've also got the Slattery's charter in the link or in the chat. So please have a look at that, and that it describes the behaviour we encourage at all of our events. Now in its 13th year, Tech23 takes pride in celebrating Australian innovation and is all about amplifying the people and organisations chipping away at the big challenges we face. We've run about 30 of these circles during the times of COVID, which were available to watch on demand. And we still have a couple more coming up. We've got one on manufacturing and we've got another one on mental health. We're also looking forward to connecting and amplifying face-to-face at a real event on the 15th of December in Sydney, where we will again be connecting innovators from all across Australia. We do hope you will consider joining us. Please note today's circle will be recorded. So just confirming, we will eavesdrop on the conversation and then move to Q&A, where you are welcome to come off mute and connect and chat. We will also stop recording at this time. I am so honoured and very grateful to Phil and this illustrious and incredible lineup today. And I want to encourage all of you to soak it all in. So over to you, Phil, to kick things off. Thank you so much.
Thanks so much, Rachel, and thanks to Tech23 for having us all here today and to continue having these very important conversations. As Rachel said, you know, this is a conversation and the panel, if you like, at the beginning here is really just to get you started. So if you feel bursting to ask a question or get into the conversation before we formally hand over, just go for it. Let's have a good chat and explore the issues. I'm a big believer in the important role of government. I think it has a massive role to play in innovation systems and their success. So I think it's important that we all use this session to walk away with something which allows us to work with government better, to understand something, know how we can use that advantage that government can bring. And just to sort of frame this up, I want to give you a quote from John Maynard Keynes, and this is actually from 1926, where he said, "The important thing for government is not to do things which individuals are doing already, but to do things which at present are not done at all." And I find that quite inspiring. That is not a government that just, you know, pays people to do the normal things and grant funds the same old boring projects that other people would happily take a risk on. That's government taking a risk, leading the charge, creating the opportunity for markets to exist. You know, where would we be if government projects hadn't led to the inventions like the internet, Wi-Fi, most recently mRNA vaccines, GPS, touchscreens, These were all invented by government programs and later used and exploited by the private sector to make things like the iPhones and to get us all through COVID. So this isn't the lazy state that is often the cliche describing government. This is an active participation in the innovation system. Now, governments participate in different ways, and hopefully we're going to touch on some of those things today. Sometimes governments are our customer. Sometimes governments actually invest in invention or in startups. And sometimes they create the conditions for markets to rise. And they're the things that we're going to be talking about today. And we have a fantastic group here today, in that we have Gabrielle and Sue and Julia, all from the market making side, the policy setting side, the making the machine turn side of government. And we're going to start there. We're going to make our way down to talking to Kate from LaunchVic, who is activating the Victorian ecosystem to make all these things happen. We're going to talk to Marcus Doherty, who's actually got a foot in both camps in his work as somebody advising defense, but also as a founder himself, and how he's unlocking government, but also helping government to unlock. And then we've got Colin from SpeeDx, who's a very important diagnostics company that would find it very difficult to operate without the government helping him. So that's our fabulous group today. I'm excited to have you all here, and let's see if we can sort of share some insights which get the rest of the participants understanding something new about government. So if I may, I'd love to start with you, Gabrielle Upton, and talk a bit about the amazing work that you're doing in the New South Wales government to create the market here. Like what sort of things are you doing? How are you finding out which things you should do? I'll leave it that open and just let you riff with that for a little while.
And riff I will. Thank you, Phil, to all my co-contributors, and also to Rachel for convening the group. Look, I do think the government, and I'm on the policy side, so I'm an elected person as opposed to on the departmental side. And I went to our Premier and I said 2 years ago, I've been a minister in government for 6 years. I feel that the translation of research and commercialisation is something that we've not had a champion for. I understand the power of it. I worked in private sector. I was Deputy Chancellor of a university. And so I had this keen sense that capabilities were part of what a government has to support. So they're kind of, if you want to think about it in terms of the translational research scale between TRL 1 and 3 maybe. And I could see great examples that just weren't getting the advocacy inside of government. And so, Colin's SpeeDx is a great example of that, with the translational fund, and now with our Jobs Plus program, who's been supported to the next level. Congratulations, Colin. But, literally it was because I have a passion for this area. And I think that's the capacity of a policy maker, that you can go and make a case to your government, which I did. And so, in short, without going on much longer, unless you encourage me to, and I can riff for a while, I drew an amazing group of people together, and we worked for about a year. So David Gonski came on board, names that are brand names, but a cross-section of both directors, yes, some representatives from university, venture capitalists, people who are seasoned government bureaucrats, the chair, David Thodey of CSIRO, and we launched our action plan. So a bit of a plug for that, which is that document. Oh, you can't see it. I can't see it. Anyhow, we will put a link in the chat session. But the last thing I will say is government has to be purposeful. So this was not about, as Catherine Livingstone said to me in First Net, we're not going to boil the ocean. Think about where a state government can make a difference. We picked 5 priorities. We have, at this point, $62 million in programmatic funding. And so we haven't focused on RDTI, we haven't focused on skilled immigration. We have purposefully said our power is a couple of things. It goes back to where you started, Phil. Government is a customer. We can create a market and we launched in June our Small Business Innovation Research Program, which is based off the US model, which has worked in a decadal fashion to create new solutions to government agency problems. The other thing was we can convene people, we can bring people together, we can place make. You know, we've got 3 large innovation precincts in New South Wales, Tech Central, Erythropolis, and Westmead, and a number of other smallers, but they're our primary innovation. So we can bring, by way of planning, you know, curating, Jobs Plus programs, site these innovation districts and bring people together. I think the last thing is, of course, the way that traditionally government has worked. We work through giving grants, but that's fine as long as they're over a period of time. But I think what we really need to do is use those other powers. And so the 5 priorities in our action plan go to the places where we can make a difference. The last thing I'll say is the process we're involved in now, we haven't done this in the state before, is to create a roadmap around research translation. Where are the capabilities that as a government we should support before the market will to develop? And so we will bring that to home by the end of the year. So thanks, Phil. Leave my comments there.
That's great, Gabrielle. Thank you. And, you know, you were talking a little bit there about sort of picking 5 priorities as an example. Like how I think one of the things you do terrifically well is you listen. And I think you're pretty well known for being, you know, at the end of the phone for for many people. And you're certainly, you know, you're certainly listening to the innovation system. But how do you do that? How do you do what Julia's describes as foresighting?
Oh, a little bit of that is with our roadmap. So, you know, thinking about where we can make a difference in terms of capabilities. So again, you know, a lot of work which our government and governments traditionally do is we back the big mature industries who, let's face it, are going to need new technologies and capabilities that my piece in government works to. So I think it's kind of additive to what they do. I think that's probably what you mean, the foresighting where things come. I think there are our roadmap, which we could share a survey that we're going to be launching with Tech23, calls out a couple of things that I think we know and our chief scientist knows intuitively where we should be able to build capabilities and support. But there will also be those occasions where we'll say, look, we don't have a strength in that capability, but there's an issue of sovereignty or there's an issue of strategic policy making. And the last thing I'd say on that is we launched last Wednesday, I think it was, an EOI into what we have as a proposal, $4 million to establish a semiconductor design bureau in New South Wales. And again, this is, you know, early stage. We believe in the market. There is a role for New South Wales to play. We're not going to fabricate semiconductors. That's what, you know, China and Taiwan do very well. But we can have a kind of a strategic play around design of semiconductors. And so $4 million behind this program. It was launched last week, closes the 1st of November, is the way that we will try and do that.
Great. Now, another thing I'd just like to sort of dig into a little bit is you use a very interesting phrase around sort of decadal thinking when you're thinking about what you're going to focus on. Can you just sort of talk a little bit more about that, what that means and why it's important?
Oh, look, it's so important in government. One of the recommendations in our action plan was to make sure our grant programs are more than 2 to 5 years. It might sound like a no-brainer, but you know, government is a kind of a system that churns very quickly. Ministers change, leadership changes, and I'm you know, with great respect to some of our speakers today who are involved on the departmental side, they are really the carriers of the tomb of knowledge and experience between ministers and between governments. But decadal thinking is really important around this. But look, you know, even companies these days, having worked in the private sector, have, you know, quite short periods in which to produce results, but they can have, through backing a board and stakeholders, you know, a more decadal approach. So I think, look, I will do what I can while in this role to have a more long-term thought about what are the capabilities. And when we do this R&D roadmap, I suspect there will only be, you know, maybe 4 or 5 capabilities that will go something like, you know, sensors, AI, quantum computing, where we have a lot invested in our academy out at ATPI in Sydney, There might be something else in there, and we will probably call out an intersection with particularly industry sectors where we will focus, but it'll be pretty, you know, which I find in government, you need to be very focused, pick your winners within reason, maybe not one sectoral industrial capability that you're going to focus on, have a couple, but really push them hard and have the constant advocacy around them, which is what I hope to do more of.
Fantastic. Thanks, Gabrielle. Now, I think we should move on to one of these tomes of knowledge, which is Julia, who is in one of the departments in science and environment, right, Julia, in Queensland government. Now, you're making markets. Tell us what you're doing and how you think about that.
Yeah, so I kind of think about it in terms of, if you're working away, deeply embedded in your business, trying to maintain your customers, you haven't really got the time for the strategic foresighting. So we regard that as a really significant component of the government role. So we've done quite a lot of work around that. You know, the synthetic biology work that we've worked on with you a bit, Phil, that's been around building a synthetic biology industry in Queensland. And we did that through some strategic foresighting with CSIRO in the first instance. We've since been looking at other and newer sectors. So we've produced a document called the New Chapter, which identifies 9 seed knowledge intensive industries that we think have a real opportunity for Queensland. And they will be the next things that we focus on beyond things like synthetic biology that we're already working on. But we've had a long history of this in Queensland, of course. So with Smart State, a lot of it kicked off with Smart State under Peter Beattie, and then Advanced Queensland. And we're doing a new refresh of Advanced Queensland in the next year with the current chief entrepreneur working away. And then we see another important role in this connectivity and barriers to collaboration that we find is a significant role that government can play. There are many barriers to collaboration for business and for business with university, but they're all quite easy to overcome if you just get people in rooms finding the advantage in working together. And so we do a lot of work in trying to bring people together to help them understand each other's perspectives. And to see how to grow the pie or the bucket of money instead of just squabbling over the crumbs at the other end. So we've been doing a lot of work around that for building our industries in Queensland.
So much of it's about the people, isn't it? Do you find you have to build talent in your group that really knows how to bring people together and sort of focus on the opportunity and build that bridge?
And find your champions. You know, we found some really excellent champions across many organisations. It's about the individuals who will make things different, I think, in the early stages of setting up these whole new industries, where it's not doing the usual, it's doing something new and creative. And I think that's a real opportunity if you can find them.
Yeah, and obviously I can certainly speak for, being one of the people that's been pulled together into a room by you and your team to get things happening. And, there really are some things happening. I mean, and you touched on one of them, which is the whole opportunity of synthetic biology, building things with biology, bioeconomy, and, Queensland having a significant advantage and opportunity there. Like, what does success look like for the state?
Yeah, so we sat down and did a bit of a plan around that particular industry and developing that particular industry. And for us, that focused on bringing in companies from overseas, because it's such a new industry, as well as building our own and bringing them here. Our advantages are around sugar, clean green image for food-related things, fantastic export agreements with Asian countries, and the fact that we've got fantastic transport units because we've had such a long history of transporting, natural resources to those places. So we've seen our opportunities. Those conversations are ongoing, and we saw the biggest intervention that government could make was around contract manufacturing to kick that off. So we've been doing some quite intensive work around the potential for contract manufacturing, and building our capability and workforce, like providing the direction, sending and indications so that we can build that capability and workforce in a particular area that hasn't quite taken off yet, but we are working on it.
It's going to happen. It's definitely going to happen, Julia.
It's going to happen. It is so going to happen if I have to drag it.
I'm sure. I'm sure. Now let's move on to Sue and Transport for New South Wales. You guys you're actually in the same building with a lot of startups, actually, aren't you? And how are you working with startups? How are you working with the innovation system? I think you're looking for the latest cutting edge technology that's going to bring this whole thing to life. Tell us what you're up to.
Thanks, Bill. Look, I think, there's a few things in that for Transport for New South Wales. I think similar to Julia and Gabrielle, it's that, we have a strategic plan, a long horizon strategy which is actually out for consultation at the moment, the next version, so the 2061 version of our transport strategy. But when we started that journey, 2016, 2017, we really signalled to the market that we were going to do things in a different way. So standing up before industry and saying that we needed to change some of the ways that we worked internally. We needed to be more open to collaboration, and we really wanted to change the focus of how we work. And probably sounds a little cliched in terms of putting the customer at the centre of everything that we do, but it really is important in that over the last 5 years, you've really seen that shift and change in Transport for New South Wales. So things like our approach to open data, where we've actually provided up, data to actually encourage startups and people to come in and commercialise products using the data, innovation challenges, just a whole different range of different mechanisms that we've used to actually enable and encourage industry to work differently with Transport for New South Wales. And that idea of the customer at the centre. So we have a strategic view with the pillars that we work under. We're very close to our customers in terms of what their needs are. And then falling out of that is all the things that we need to do. So it sends a really clear signal to the market and to industry in terms of the things and the themes that transport is wanting to bring to life over the next 40 years. And so certainly strategies, zero emission bus strategy that was recently released as well, in terms of, we're doing a lot of work around alternate fuels at the moment. And I think one of the other things I would just say is also in terms of government is government's ability to work collaboratively together as government. So certainly when you're looking at these really big themes, hydrogen, for example, there are different wedges that different parts of government play in that spaces. So really to bring industries to life, I think it's not just Transport for New South Wales, it's not just Department of Planning, but it's government as a whole that sort of needs to get together and have that holistic strategy where we all play a part and we can actually start to see some of these industries build.
And how does that work? Do you find yourself talking with other departments, and do you have to sort of connect a whole bunch of pieces together in order to make something like
I like what Julia said about getting people into the room. So a big part of my day is joining the dots between things and getting the right people into conversations, which is, and whether that be other government departments or industry generally, or a combination of those things. But it's like a big gigantic jigsaw puzzle, I think, where you just need to get all the pieces and fit them into place. But belief is really that, you kind of need those pieces if you want it to work. So
I wrote a post recently around the job of innovation, and actually it's it's not these beautiful sort of serial diagrams with arrows going from left to right, is it? It's like this just big mess of relationships and people all trying something, and something's working, something's not working. But over time, a sort of signal rising from the noise.
Absolutely. I think it's very much that, you know, the shared vision, I guess, of, you know, where we would like to head, but very much it's about building that pathway with a whole range of different stakeholders. And yeah, as you're saying, it's definitely more that than this. So.
I think it's really exciting to hear you all talk so far, and I you know, I'm really glad this is coming across. It's like government as in the weeds, you know, sleeves rolled up into the mud, having conversations, pulling people together, figuring out how we get something done. It's not the cliche of go to the website, you know, fill in the grant application form and hope for the best. It's a very active participant in the innovation process. Another thing that you said, Sue, which I really liked, was the you know, you talked about 40 years as a time scale. And I know, for example, one of the areas you're working on is quantum computing, for example, which again is just a sort of very exciting area, and we'll get to that when we get to Marcus in a moment. But that's an area for Australia that we've talked about in the quantum circles here gone by, that it's not just the what if we have Australian quantum computing companies, but it's what does the rest of Australian industry look like if we've got a quantum capability here in Australia. And I know we'll get to that in a second with Marcus, but it's brilliant to see government actually asking that question and figuring out how to work with the technology. Is there anything you wanted to say on that, Sue?
Yeah, I think you know, just the 40. Being the ED for emerging technologies, I often get asked how that works with a 40-year time horizon. So is it sort of crystal ball gazing? But you're right, with technologies like quantum, hydrogen fuels, those sorts of things with a long timeline, if governments don't jump in now, if we're not sort of signaling interest in those industries now, then potentially we're not ready for when the technology is realized. And autonomous vehicles is the same. You know, a lot of people, why are we getting involved in AV now? Because so many things need to change for when that technology is ready, the infrastructure that supports it, the policy that supports it. So many things have to fit around it, that if governments don't embrace these new technologies now, when they're actually ready to scale into communities, we simply won't be ready. So I think there's a range of those types of technologies that we jump into at certain points. And part of my role is to look at when we do. But, you know, there's just so much that has to happen to enable some of these other things to happen. And just joining those dots also takes time. That, you know, if we don't have that longer term view, then yeah, we simply won't realize the outcomes that we're trying to imagine.
Yeah, we find ourselves in our venture capital fund asking the question of a startup, yeah, what do you need to happen in the world around you for you to be successful? And that's one of the roles governments play, to actually lay down that environment so that the environment is ready for the innovators to come and design their solutions.
Absolutely.
Now let's go to Kate. Let's go south to Victoria and see what's going on at LaunchVic, because I think we've heard a lot of talk about connecting the dots, the need to sort of build bridges between all the different things people are working on. You're kind of doing that you're kind of operationalizing that as a state, aren't you, at Startup Vic? What's your job like?
Yeah, well, it's a lot of it is facilitating people and making sure the right people are in the room. So not dissimilar to Sue there. But I think, we're also taking a long time frame approach, not quite 40 years, but, a 10-year approach is a typical lifespan of a successful startup from zero to hero at $1 billion or whatever it might be, maybe a little longer. And, startup ecosystems take time to grow in the order of 20 to 30 years to really grow something that's pretty nascent to something that's truly world class. So we're looking at this at a macro level across the ecosystem, but we do also play very specifically in the relationship between government and startups. So we're here as the state government startup agency, making sure that we've got the right policies in place, making sure that we're investing in the ecosystem, and we do that through a combination of grants and equity. But perhaps most pertinent to this conversation is the work we've done through our Civic Labs Accelerator, which very specifically addressed the question of government procurement. And every time we survey startups, one of the top 5 issues is procurement, and almost inevitably it's specifically government procurement. And there are some real challenges for startups to get access to government procurement opportunities. And so, I see it from both sides. I see the government who has every, the best will in the world. They're really trying to drive innovations and bring in new thinking that's futuristic. And then on the other hand, you've got startups that are scrappy, haven't got the policies in place, haven't yet got the foundations to prove themselves to a government client. And the opportunity is when you can bring those two worlds together. And I think it's absolutely about focusing on how you work. And our procurement accelerator, if there's nothing that we haven't discovered through that, it's that there is a chasm between the way government thinks, even government's most innovative people, and the way a startup thinks. And the way these two operate can be such a clash of culture. To bring the two together can be incredibly challenging. And, it's not about $10 million contracts. We're talking about hundreds of thousands of dollars of contract. But even on small contracts, just the level of risk aversion and scrutiny that government has to go through to put the right governance in place versus, the scrappiness of a young startup being able to respond to a government request can be really, really challenging. So there's a big opportunity to educate both sides of the market. And I don't think it's about one side blaming the other, but I think it's sad that we don't do as well in Australia as we could. It always makes me a little frustrated every time I see a government, whether it be state or federal, get another great big, IBM or Microsoft contract in place. Sometimes that's warranted, but sometimes there are actually startups in market that are doing a really nimble job at a much better pace and much more cutting edge that could really achieve that. And it's sad when you see contracts go to the sort of tried and trusted, stable, don't rock the boat versus pushing the bounds of innovation. And that might be at a transport front-end innovation project. It might actually just be back-end government operations like culture surveys or, other things like that are around operationalizing government and just BAU. So I think there's a real culture change that needs to take place to enable that risk aversion to be lifted and to think in different ways. And if we can grow our local companies here, we're going to be better placed as a nation versus procuring off internationals and particularly there's nothing wrong with the Microsofts and IBMs and Amazons. We love them. They're a vital part of the tech community here in Australia. But, they themselves will often go and procure indirectly from younger startups and companies. And if we can find a way to perhaps circuit break some of that, it will enable younger companies to have access to bigger contracts, which will allow them to grow more, prove themselves on their own turf, and then go international and launch. And I think that's the final thing I'll end on is it's also very sad when you see brilliant companies who are not able to get contracts in Australia, but are working their backsides off to get contracts around the world. They're doing that successfully globally, but then aren't able to bring it back into Australia. And that then leads to, a propensity to lose jobs offshore because they've got contracts in Europe or North America that are really fueling the company's growth. And so I think this also comes back to a macroeconomic play about where do we want our jobs to be in the future and what sort of economy are we trying to generate. And ultimately, I think we all agree we want a high-skilled, future-proof economy. And the last couple of years have taught us nothing. That's what we absolutely want to achieve, and every government's working to create those jobs. But there are levers that can be pulled that that are set against a framework that can be deeply challenging on both sides. But I think we have to call it and have to encourage government to do as much procurement as they can from homegrown Aussie companies that are going to create those local high-skilled jobs. Yeah,
we've definitely shown what we can do together when we set our mind to it, haven't we? This risk issue between what a startup must do and how a government can often think and behave, like how has there been anything in particular that you've learned is a kind of breakthrough to sort of bridge that gulf?
I think there are some very clear hygiene factors that startups can do when they interact with government. It's having the trading history and making sure your accounts are audited. So maybe you haven't got the 3 years minimum trading history, but you can get audited accounts to make sure that you are meeting some of those requirements. Make sure you've got policies in place. HR policies, we've seen trip up startups that, are trying to procure from government, but haven't got the obligatory requirements of government that government require, just to make sure that the business is a legitimate business and is protecting their staff, or meeting ESG requirements, whatever it is. So having some of those things in place aren't a huge amount of work, but can make a very big difference when you're presenting to government and making yourself look professional. I think it also goes to the way young companies engage, and government's quite well versed to engaging with companies that have very sophisticated government relations personnel that really understand how to work government, and there is a tool to that, and so making sure that you're helping companies understand what level they need to get at. Ask questions like, who is the decision maker? Are you the decision maker? What is the avenue you have to go through to make a decision? Because it might be you're having a really positive conversation with a very junior person in the department. You get all excited as a startup, but you don't realize that there's 10 layers of bureaucracy, and a decision's got to go all the way up to Michelle and to make a decision, and that might take many months. And so the startup leaves the room thinking, excellent, I'm in it with, next week I could land a contract with government, and it just does not work like that. Government has got overhead. We have to be responsible on how we account for and acquit government money. So having equipping startups with the right questions to ask so that they can understand a positive conversation might be a positive conversation, but by the way, you've still got to convince 10 people above that person that this is a great idea before you even get to the, yep, okay, let's start negotiating. And beyond that, there might be a procurement process, and that procurement process might not actually kick off for another 2 or 3 years because it's just, there's a contract in place. So enabling startups to have the power to ask those questions so that they can see whether it's worth them exploring a government contract at this point in time is also something that we find really important. And a lot of people are quite naive in dealing with government, thinking that, a positive meeting means, yep, contract next week, and when that doesn't happen, they're disappointed.
Fantastic. Now let's move on to somebody who actually brings a few of these threads together, Mr. Marcus Doherty. So you're building a technology which is emerging, but will likely be, a technology which fuels industry for the next 100 years. You're working with government. Government has procured work from you, and you're also helping probably the most risk-averse government department, which is Defence, to actually start working with this technology. So you're right in the mix of government and innovation. I guess just sort of where do you want to begin, and I'm interested in how you got there into that sort of thick of things. Is it because it's necessary for you to actually be connected with government in different ways?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Phil. I'll introduce what quantum technologies are, and then I'll talk a little bit, well, how has quantum brilliance become what it is today? And one of those key aspects was a key first customer from government. After I've talked about that, I'll then talk about what Army is doing. And my role at Army, but then also what Army is doing to really accelerate the growth and adoption of a sovereign capability in quantum technology. So I'll come back to what are quantum technologies. So these are actually a diverse suite of emerging technologies which have one thing in common. They all exploit the very fundamental physical phenomena that we know, being that of quantum physics, to make a leap in either speed, precision, or accuracy across computing, communications, and sensing. And so this suite of different technologies has a profound ability to lift the productivity, the efficiencies, and the performance competitiveness of a whole range of industries across Australia. Everything from resources and mining to biotech and pharmaceuticals to agriculture and on. The CSIRO released a roadmap a year ago, and they made a highly conservative estimate that it would be $4 billion within the next 18 years, or $4 billion annual revenue of an industry in the next 18 years and 16,000+ jobs. The real potential could be much larger than that. And then the real value added to all the industries that then exploit quantum technologies could be much larger than that as well. So who is Quantum Brilliance? So we will soon become Australia's largest quantum computing company. We're the only Australian company and one of very few in the world, alongside Google, IBM, etc., who can deliver quantum computing solutions to customers today. So that's quantum computing hardware as well as software to a variety of customers. How have we got to this over the space of 2 years? We've done that through a variety of good and hard work, but also support from government. The most fundamental support that government gave us wasn't actually directly from the government, it was from the Pawsey Supercomputing Centre. They were our first customer and they agreed to establish the Quantum Computing Innovation Hub. What that did is it gave very clear and tangible validation of our products, but it did much more than that. It created an ecosystem of people who used our products. So by installing our products at the Supercomputing Centre, running these things called pioneer programs, which then introduce SMEs, corporations, researchers to then use our products, it developed an ecosystem of users and application developers for users as well. So that was a profound shift for us. As a result, Pawsey is now considered one of the global thought leaders in the integration of quantum computing in high performance computing. And so they're invited to present at all the various supercomputing conferences around the world to tell the story about what they did with Quantum Brilliance. So there's a public organisation, its primary backers are CSIRO and the Western Australian government, who are able to take a risk, invest in a nascent startup by giving them their first contract. Why were they able to do that? Because they have a mandate and the ability to have a discretionary R&D budget within Pawsey Supercomputing Centre, something that could be done elsewhere within public organisations and government-backed organisations as well. So leaving Pawsey and leaving Quantum Brilliance alone and now talking to the Australian Army. So my role there, I'm actually a part-time Army officer and I work within the Future Land Warfare branch of Army Headquarters. And my role there is to lead the Army's quantum technology roadmap. And so that roadmap seeks to tackle the major problems which are facing Army when it comes to quantum technologies so that we can best prepare ourselves to make use of them. So Army acknowledges that it is in a global competition to rapidly understand and exploit these emerging technologies, certainly in the land domain of warfare. But it also recognises that it alone, and to be frank, defence as a whole, cannot actually fund the creation of a sovereign industry in Australia. So as a result, it's taken a particular approach where it seeks to partner and team with major corporations in Australia which have similar interests. So for example, these exist in the mining sector. One current partner is BHP, but there could also be future partners in the telecommunications and logistics industries as well. What is the barrier to adopting and creating a sovereign industry? So one is understanding the technology and precisely working out where it deliver advantages and how. Army's doing that through this thing that it calls quantum technology challenges, where it regularly gives out seed money to see people, industry and researchers demonstrate solutions to particular problems. That way, those people get to understand what are Army's interests, what are its problems. They can then also use their solutions to then take as an example to venture capital, to other funding means, and say, here, we validated a solution for a particular customer, and we did it through this challenge. The other thing that we're seeing happening through that is startups and researchers are teaming with existing defence industry companies to solve those challenges. So now they are doing mutual R&D, and they're also getting contracts between each other as part of developing those future capabilities. On the other hand, Army is sharing its results and is engaging in dialogue with corporations. And so one of the outcomes so far is BHP, through its relationship with Army, has rapidly learnt about quantum technologies and is actually starting its own innovation program in adopting quantum technologies into the resource sector. And so that's a really good example where a public organisation such as Army, through being prepared to take risks and being open in its interests, its approaches, its priorities, communicating that and being prepared to work with private corporations, can rapidly stimulate the creation of activity and a new industry. Thanks, Phil.
Fantastic, Marcus. Thank you. And we should move on to Colin now and just talk a little bit about healthcare. And so your company, SpeeDx, Colin, is a diagnostics company. These are not simple companies to start. They are very relevant to working with government. What's your experience been, and have you unlocked government for the benefit of SpeeDx?
No, thank you, Phil, and thanks again for the chance to talk today. I think the really interesting discussions that have happened previously, I really enjoyed the comments that have been made so far, and I think especially a couple of things that have come up before I get into SpeeDx that I think Kate spoke about, which is it is speaking as a small company, it is really complicated to sign on to these government contracts that I'll speak to you about, and it does take. Luckily, because of our backing, we were venture capital seeded in the beginning, and we did have a requirement for audited accounts. So when we went for our first government contract, we did actually have all of those things ready to go, as well as a number of policies. But it does, for a small company, it does hit you in the face fairly quickly when you get your first list of requirements that you have to fulfill for these types of contracts. So I think preparing the next wave of startups for what it is like to supply to government is, I think, a really great idea. And I think to Marcus's point there, that the idea of an organization like the Army willing to take some risks for some future benefits, and again, what Sue, I think, spoke about earlier in the transport industry, I think is a really great goal that I think should hopefully come out of this, is having those list of the wish list of these various organizations publicly available, so that small companies and researchers can come together to try to meet them. I think that's a great outcome if that's what comes next. From the SpeeDx point of view, we are very, very thankful to the government, and specifically within the government, the New South Wales Medical Devices Fund. So we are not only a diagnostics company, but we were a technology innovator. So we invented technology within PCR testing. So I think everyone knows what PCR testing now. It's probably the only good thing to come out of the coronavirus pandemic, is I don't have to explain what PCR is. Everyone seems to get it. But yeah, so we developed our own technology over many years, and we saw the opportunity not only to just license it, which is what our model was in the beginning, but actually to go out and sell it ourselves. And the Medical Device Fund was a great opportunity for SpeeDx to transition on the fly as we were developing and build all of the policies, the departments, everything that we needed to supply to government and to other opportunities that we saw. We also were able to go and to repay, I guess, or to get back into the New South Wales Health infrastructure through supplying to them as a customer. So one of our products that we created was an antibiotic resistance test, commonly used now in STI identification. It's gone on to really change the way STIs are being treated both here and globally. And we've been able to supply now 5 laboratories within the New South Wales Health network with our test. The interesting thing is I think what probably as a future state would be great from our side is to, especially what we've seen in the pandemic, is to see this idea of sovereign capability really come out in health, and not just New South Wales, but I think, you know, all of the states together have seen the same issues over and over again. And I think there's some real capacity in Australia to be able to address that without having to look to the US, Europe, or Asia, and leverage the real know-how and the capacity that's been built over the last couple of years. So I think that's a real opportunity for the future.
Great, thank you, Colin. Now, I hope I pronounced this name correctly, Ratnam. Are you? Would you like to unmute yourself if you're listening? Hello.
Hello. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you. You've asked a couple of really great questions in the chat, Raj, about
one thing I've noticed is that when it comes to investments into Australia or developing of technologies, the thing that I hear repeatedly is inconsistent policies across states. And when I talk to my colleagues overseas, they ask me, who's the government? We talk about government, and I'm always asked, who is your government? I said, what do you mean, who is our government? He said, well, we are hearing different stands, different policies that come in, you know, from different sides of, sorry, my video is off, from different angles of your country. And it's puzzling. It doesn't give us a confident environment for us to go there. And not only that, you're not a huge population, so we just can't come into New South Wales or the Queensland. We need to know that when we establish something, we can go statewide, countrywide, and then from there, go into the Asia Pacific region. And I think this is fundamental. Same with technology startups. They always say, we need investment. But I'm telling you, you're not going to get major investors coming in if they're not sure what the actual underlying policies and strategies are of the country. Because sovereign risk is one of the big things that people are worried about. And that's my point. We need more effort somehow. And even this going to the COP26 meeting, you know, with Scott Morrison, it is quite, it's really great news actually to think that we are going to go there with a united statement. And that's what we need, not only in that, but in anything to do with investments, anything to do with helping new technologies come into Australia.
Right, great. Thank you very much, Roger. So does anyone want to take that? Like, we've all heard about some very interesting things. We're all based in different states. You know, Gabrielle, talk about how we actually solve this problem.
Roger, I have a great deal of sympathy. It's a legacy of our democratic evolution, but just to jump to the point, and I would imagine other states will do this, with kind of supporting capability and innovation in our state through the action plan that I was talking about. One of our 5 key principles or priorities was to, you know, leverage opportunities out of federal government policy and programmatic response. So, for example, and we have some examples of this, and I've been talking with various ministers' offices there. I think it is a responsibility of the states to be able to make ourselves legible to you. If you choose to come to us, and of course, we love your business in this state, as any other jealous state member would say for any other state or jurisdiction of Australia, to make the federal government policy parameters kind of fit neatly with what we're doing at the state level. So to give you a great example, with our 3 key priority precincts, we are making sure, for example, with one that we've invested in both with local government and the federal government, and it's called Aerotropolis, which is based out in Western Sydney, and we'll have new infrastructure, the new airport for Sydney. When we work with companies, mature or startups, what we do is we go to the federal government and we make sure that what we do when we get leverage funding, which is always something that we're jealous for, that it lines up with what is the modern manufacturing strategy federally. And one of those, in the case of that, just to make it real, for companies that we're working with to build Western Sydney up to all the possibilities that come of that new city that's going to be there. A key plank of that is going to be around modern manufacturing, advanced manufacturing. And so that is one of the key pillars of the modern manufacturing strategy federally. So, you know, we are not the national government, but we try and make ourselves as legible as we can to the federal government because it's in our interests to be able to take money from them and line that up with an economic opportunity here in the state.
Right, thanks, Gabrielle. And Julia, you had some thoughts on what to read to solve this problem?
It's a marvelous book by Maria, or her name's not Maria, it's Mariana. Sorry, got that wrong. Mazzucato, who writes about the entrepreneurial state and really makes the point about creating markets, not just fixing markets, is one of her keys. The significant role government has already had, you know, has had for millennia in having influence over the most significant outcomes for government. So I thought there was a lovely example. We do a lot in biotech areas of the over 1,000 drugs produced in the US over however many years. Only 14% are considered important and new, and 75% of those come from NIH-funded labs, so that's publicly funded labs, not from the big pharma, who are often seen as very creative and so on, but are often just producing minor variants of similar kind of drugs. So I think there is a whole piece of work internationally about this role of government in innovation kind of program that I think is really worth looking at and investigating as part of making decisions about what we're going to do here in Australia to do that, learning from their past experiences.
Julia, how does your team sort of balance this sort of state competitiveness, which can be, you know, that can be powerful. I think when, you know, competitive forces are good for everybody at some point. But then how do you sort of balance that with them making sure it sort of lands well as a country? And I think the stuff you and I are doing together in synthetic biology is really, it's a national capability where Queensland will have some unique advantages. Yeah, like how do you coordinate across the states to bring it all up?
We actually see that as quite important in our work, and in many ways we identify where we're going to make more effort based on our own opportunities and advantages, and assuming a national collaboration and industry kind of collaboration there. You know, we are the smaller player on the East Coast, so that's always incredibly important to us about doing that sort of work. But we acknowledge that there are times to collaborate and times to compete, and so we do kind of understand that. I kind of agree that there isn't kind of a national umbrella under which we are working. But usually we do things like we used to go to bio regularly, and you know, Queensland would usually be on the large stand with the other states. So we do tend to come together for major international events.
Great, thanks, Julia. Do we have any more questions from the group, from the participants today? I'll give it a second.
Just while we're waiting, Phil, Raja, on one more comment on collaboration across the state. Certainly, in a transport sense, we see quite a lot of collaboration. You know, trains cross borders, trucks cross borders. So there's so there is an acknowledgement, I think, in most transport, well, in fact, in all the transport agencies in Australia, that there is a need to collaborate on a number of policy positions and a number of other things. And you'll be happy to know that in the background, we're all working together in work groups at the moment to sort of bring some of these things to life as well. So, and more broadly, we're also working quite globally when we're looking at mobility as a service or AI or a whole range of different technologies as well. not only are we involved in a lot of national work groups, but also global work groups. So, you know, it may not happen overnight in terms of being, you know, perfectly resolved, but it is something that also we're very aware of and something that we're kind of working towards as well.
Great, thanks, Sue. Now, David Nguyen had a question.
Thanks, Phil. Hi, everyone. I'm the CEO for the company called Brilliance. So my company, I believe my company is one of the only 3 companies around the world have owned the drone controller system for commercial drone solutions together with DJI in China and 3D robotics in the US. So we have a quite unique solution for drone, which is we can build and customize for any type of customer from government to business. And then we have a couple of projects very good in Europe about drone for agriculture aspect, where we combine the IoT device underground with the drone to have the complete automated system for the farmer in the Europe. So basically, I want to ask a question like how to work with the government in Australia to support the industry sector like agriculture or mining, you know, or working with the rural fire services to help them to have the advanced technology rather than they have to build a solution from their own or have to buy the third-party drone and then try to fix it. We can do everything from the start up and then all need connected and then work compatible. So the question I want to ask is like we feel a bit of struggle to work with the government in the way to quickly adopt the technology and give the solution. So we have to go to a couple of rounds of, you know, innovation challenge and wait for a couple of months where the times go by. The technology sit there and then not make the use of it. So basically, the only way I can find to work with the government is that I have to win some grant, and from there we have to work with the government, work with university, which is like takes long time. Is there any way to do it faster?
Kate, and I'm Gabrielle, but Kate, I think you know Civic Labs has been helping people with this problem, right? What would you say to David?
Yeah, look, I mentioned when I made my opening comments of a company that had worked across Africa, Europe, and Asia. It was a drone company. I'm sure you know Swoop Aero and the team down here in Victoria. They've got offshore contracts before they got onshore contracts, and they're you know do much better globally outside of Australia than in Australia. I think it ultimately goes back to understanding what you need to do to create a company that government can procure with and have those conversations and go in with those questions, like because every government in their fire services, in their agriculture services, in their transport are looking at technologies like drone because we know that it's important. So the question you need to ask them is, what are their procurement timelines? When are they thinking of you know, are they doing research? Is it something that they actually can see a procurement coming down the track and figure out how to get yourself into that cycle? I'm always loath to suggest that startups get consultants on board because I think so much of, I'm sure you're struggling away trying to manage all your expenses, but having someone that can support you to navigate that government relations challenge can be very effective. And I would caution you to find the right people. It's one of the jobs that we do at Civic Labs is a dedicated government liaison service that we can actually get people that know how to go around government, not just talk the talk, but actually have experience walking the walk and can help you navigate that. And you know, we offer that service for our local startups here, but I would definitely encourage you to get some advice that can make sure that you're having the conversations, not just to go in and sell, but to understand what's the procurement timeline for government. So in their fire service, are they looking at drone technology? I almost guarantee they are. Have they thought about procuring? They might say yes, they might say no. What are the timeframes that they're going to procure over? And it might be that, you know, they're not waiting, they're thinking of this as a 3 years down the track horizon timeframe. Once you know that, don't waste your time trying to sell to government when government has got 101 hurdles they've got to go through to get the approvals to enable the procurement. If they're saying we're procuring in 6 months' time, excellent. What do you need to do? Do you need to get onto a services register to be procurement ready? Do you need to get those policies in place, and ask those questions? So a lot of it's less about selling to government than understanding the process you need to go to in order to sell to government.
It's like you need a 2-speed business, don't you? You kind of need to know you're going to be getting these government things, but that's operating at this other speed, and you're planning to get it done later on in most cases.
Often a real challenge for startups, because we see that when startups put all their eggs in the government basket, often the government's moving too slow. Yep. And they need to chase private sector opportunities and sales in order to survive, even though government might be their long-term customer. But just the if you're building a great drone company here in Australia, there'll be hundreds of entrepreneurs in Europe, in Tel Aviv, in California, in New York doing the same thing. You've got to keep pace with them. So where do you find those customers that are going to help you grow and scale to gain market share while you've got government moving through a slower process?
And drones is another great example, because it's got the, you can't fly a drone over a city, you can't land anywhere unless there's regulation around that, and it's actually been approved. So this is a whole area where government needs to open up the opportunity and be really clear about how people can operate. Gabrielle, you had a comment, I think, on this question.
I did, and thank you for Kate's comment. So part of the action plan was, how do we make government more easily understood to people like yourself? And there were 2 ways in which we're tackling that at the moment. I mentioned the R&D roadmap, so that you will be able to know what technologies or capabilities the government is interested in procuring, and also as an attractor for investment, and then also how we spend our dollars internally. So that's one method by which, and again, we will be publishing that at the end of this year. So you'll be able to look at something and say, drone technology will be part of that. You'll be able to say, well, actually, we're interested in the state government in investment and capability building around drone technology and its intersection with, for example, bushfire preparedness, or something that gives you a roadmap to know that you will be in a conversation with us that we can relate back to something that's that we are working to. The second thing, there are 3 things I want to say. The second thing was that this kind of lack of understanding of where government wants help and where we don't want help, and where we might find solutions from companies like yours, but you may not be able to directly connect with us, is by creating what we're calling a matchmaking platform. That will shortly go out to EOI, and we will be doing a small use case around creating an environment that we will host as an online platform, where you will be able to post what you think might be an opportunity for government. Government will be able to view it. We'll also have buyers of research or new innovative ideas by way of investors, by way of companies. So it will kind of be, again, coming back to this, we can create, we can convene, we can create with good public purpose a place where companies like yours can post what you're doing, and then have other people see it more visibly. And specifically to your question about drones and the Rural Fire Service, we, out of the budget in June, I got $28 million to do what Mariana Mazzucato talks about as a mission-based piece of work. This is where you have a big problem that government acknowledges it can't solve by itself. And so we will be going to market with solutions around that. There will be a translational fund that you might be able to participate in. And that comes back to where Colin and SpeeDx said they got their first kind of help and support from the state government. There will also be, so that's for new and original product, our translational fund. But there will also be another segment of that bushfire preparedness challenge, which will look at piloting existing technologies for a direct application to the RFS. And next week, we will have the first meeting, and this should install some hope, that we are coordinated internally with a group that I work with that includes the Head of Resilience, New South Wales, Shane Fitzsimmons, RFS, Police and Fire Emergency Services, Department of Environment, all of the parts of government on the bureaucratic side that have a vested interest in either a technology or a piece of research, or have money to spend on something that will solve the big problem, which is how we're going to deal with bushfires when they come again. So please stay tuned for that. We should announce the components around the pilot technologies for bushfire preparedness and the program around the translational aspect, which will be based on a medical devices fund in terms of how it will work, what it will look like. That would be before the end of this year.
Thanks, Kate and Gabrielle. Basically, like the feedback you gave is very good, and I actually doing all of that thing you mentioned actually at the moment. And we did talk to the private sector, and we did have a project to build with the company to do the drone for delivery, for parcel delivery. We have the project with Rio Tinto to do with the drone for undermining inspection. So all of that we are doing. The question I want to ask and really want to know is like, I really want to see the government step up and doing something with the early adopter or something support the startup, because we don't want in the way that we develop very good with the private sector, or somehow we go overseas and we have a big customer over there. So at the end, if the government have to use our technology, they have to pay decent money for that rather than very cheap money from the beginning for the early adopter. So that is something I really want to see the government like more proactive in that part.
Yeah, anyone want to have a crack at that? Are we seeing that anywhere in government, people actually reaching out for things that are decisively early?
We ran an SBIR program based on the UK, US kind of models for a number of areas, so that people could develop with us solutions to issues within government, with some really quite good outcomes on those things, including some outcomes in fire-based stuff with company whose name I forget all the time now, based in the Sunshine Coast, working with the US, who've been doing all the Californian fire warning systems, and can warn you on a fire within, I think it was 11 seconds. And they have an example in the USA where they warned the fire service and they started evacuating people before a single fire had hit the ground because it was moving so fast. So there are systems out there that we're working on.
Great. Thank you, Julia. Thank you, David, for your excellent question. And thanks to everybody for a great session today. I hope everyone has left with a feeling of enthusiasm about how we can all work together to build a fantastic world with this innovation system that we've got, that people have hope, that people are talking to each other, pulling people together to make great things happen. Please get involved, roll up your sleeves, make great things yourself, and thanks for a great chat. And I might move back to Adina.
Thank you so much, Phil. Thank you so much, contributors. That was a lot of food for thought. As you can see, so much more that we could probably talk about. But in the interest of time, we will wrap it up there. I'd like for all to please give a hand of applause, please, to all our contributors. Now, as you know, this was recorded, so you're able to revisit all the learnings today, or share it on if you'd like to keep that conversation going. And we also recommend that you have a look at our future circles, which are coming up very soon. Lots of interesting stuff to take in. And there's a lot of past circles as well that you might want to check out. But until next time, we'd like to thank you.
Thanks, everyone.